to give you a little background on Chris. He's a magna cum laude graduate from Georgetown. He spent 25 years establishing a strong reputation in the business community. After working for Fortune 500 companies, including Procter & Gamble and Clorox, I'm like, Chris, you worked at Clorox and God. And we realized we overlapped, but probably never knew each other.
Everybody else in here.
I have a cold too, so that's not helping. Chris transitioned his skills into sports memorabilia industry. In 2005, he created the website Game Used Universe, which quickly became the largest and most significant internet community of collectors and dealers in the game used sports memorabilia space. Currently, Chris is vice president of consignments for one of the largest sports memorabilia auction houses in the United States, and has established himself as an advocate for many professional athletes in helping them with their charitable organizations. In addition to his professional life, Chris spends a great deal of time teaching scriptural principles within the Catholic Church. Chris is a lector here at St. John, where he also leads Bible studies and programs designed to help members explore deeper aspects of the Catholic faith. So, turn this over to Chris, and
I'd like to thank the Academy. I always wanted to do that. Am I the only one?
Yeah.
I'm glad everybody found the room. We actually did have to move. We had it scheduled originally in a smaller room, and thankfully we had enough people sign up, so we moved it here. And an email went out, so we'll talk about that for the workshop. If you got the email, you know we're going to start the workshop. Each of you are going to come up and give a 1 minute speech about what you think is the path to happiness. Okay? We're going to start here. Just kidding, of course. But hopefully, if you haven't thought about the path to happiness before tonight in great detail, hopefully we'll be able to do that this evening. I've personally been attempting to pursue and understand happiness for quite a while. In fact, most of my adult life has been spent taking a lot of courses. Most of the books I read had to do with personal development, trying to find what the world, I guess, would call success, which in my mind I thought would translate into happiness. And while there are things that have made me happy, for example, my wife here, my son, my friends, I don't think I ever felt complete happiness. For example, what happens if my wife and son aren't around? What happens if I call all my friends and he's not home? In fact, I called all my friends tonight and he told me I gotta get my goldfish back, so that's why he's not here. So anyway, it wasn't really until I heard began to implement what we're going to talk about tonight that I really felt that I began to feel true inner peace and happiness. So I'm going to share with you tonight, this message primarily comes from a compilation of messages from Bishop Robert Barron with a little of me sprinkled in. And fortunately for you, it's only a little of me. So. But it will be interactive. I thought about having questions during the talk, but I think it's really important tonight. There's kind of a narrative that we're going to follow, and I'd like to take that through. But I will leave time. Try to end it a little bit earlier than 8:10, because I really do want to have questions. This isn't a class, right? This isn't an academic exercise. This is our lives. This is, the objective here is to really talk about things that we can incorporate into our lives to find true happiness, right? So I'm going to take you through some stories and some messages tonight, primarily based on Scripture. And I found these to be absolute truths. And we're going to look at some Scriptures and some things tonight in a way that you possibly may not have done before, okay? You'll hear a few jokes. You might laugh at them. And you may come face to face with some things that may take some time to process. I'll tell you the truth. When the message that I'm going to share with you tonight, when I first heard it, was very difficult for me. It challenged a lot of the preconceptions and things I was indoctrinated into in life, and it shocked me. And I had to go back and really meditate on it and think about it and see, was this really true? And I've come to find it to be the case. And so don't feel overwhelmed. Don't feel like you have to grasp everything. In fact, we're doing a few things tonight. I want to introduce, this is Mike Divis, by the way, a good friend of mine here at St. John's. A great person, by the way, if you didn't like to meet Mike. He's going to be working with a few slides that we'll use. And in the back is my son behind that camera. We're going to be filming this. My son's in from New York. He's a film student at NYU. And since we paid all that money, we said we got to do something. So we're going to put this, we're going to probably try to put this on YouTube so you can go back to it and view it again. For a mere $49.95. Of course, it'll be free. All the good things of God are free. Amen? So what I want to do, though, is start out with the big takeaway up front. Okay? I'm going to give you the message in a way that I think is easy to remember. The big takeaway about what I believe is the path to happiness. And then we're going to explore in detail what that really encompasses. Okay? It's a variation of something said by St. Thomas Aquinas. You come to a Catholic church and they don't quote Aquinas, then you got to be worried. Great theologian. But this is the takeaway. As you can see, love what Jesus loved and shun what Jesus shunned. And we're going to talk about what this means, okay, in detail. So, with that said, where we're going to start, we're going to start by looking at a scene in the Old Testament with one of the most important prophets of the Old Testament. And when we think about the paradigmatic prophet of the Old Testament, who do we think would be a good example? Mike, we put up the next slide. This is a slide, right, of the Transfiguration, right, where two people came to Jesus. Right? One of them was Moses, symbolizing the law, right? And who came to Jesus symbolizing the prophets? Anybody? Elijah. Sorry? Elijah, right? Elijah represented the prophets. So we don't have any writings from Elijah, ironically, like we do from Isaiah or Jeremiah, right? But Elijah was the paradigm of the prophet in action. Okay? But before we move to this enormously important scene of the Old Testament, I want to make sure we're clear on what it means to be a prophet. I think a prophet is often misunderstood. But a prophet is someone who speaks divine truth. Okay? The great theologian Abraham Joshua Heschel said, the prophet is someone who feels the feelings of God and then speaks out of that experience. Someone who feels the feelings of God and speaks out of that experience. They're feeling the pathos of God, the pattern of God, if you will, and then speaking out of that experience. So what is the pattern of God? The book of John opens up. It says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Right? I had a friend in parochial school. He told me that in the Catholic Bible that read, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was no. That's not true, but I went to parochial school. But that word is actually in Greek logos, right? Which we translate as word. Right? The beginning was the word. Yeah? Essentially, it does mean that. But another good rendering of logos would be pattern. Pattern. In the beginning was the great pattern of the divine mind. Right? It's that pattern of the divine mind that became flesh. Jesus is the divine person, the divine mind, the divine pattern in person. Right? So again, if we're looking for happiness, we can listen to philosophers, right, and people who can give us counsel. But in the end, if they're not leading us to the person of Christ, the reflection, the incarnation of the divine pattern, then they're not taking us fully into a place where we're going to find true completeness and true happiness. Interestingly, the word prophet in Hebrew is navi. And those who speak Hebrew suggest that this word navi has an overtone of madman. Interesting, right? That would kind of make sense, wouldn't it? In a world that's gone astray, that's gone awry, we have to see the world differently in order to see it the way God intended. G.K. Chesterton, great writer, he said this. He said, "The only ones who see the world correctly are those who stand on their heads." By the way, there's a couple other quotes I've used tonight from Chesterton, but two others that I think are extremely relevant here. He said, "A dead thing can go with the stream, but only a living thing can go against it." Right? He also said, "Don't be so open-minded that your brains fall out." So back to this idea of a prophet, right? And seeing the pattern of God, right? It's like in the, how many saw the movie A Beautiful Mind? Isn't that with Russell Crowe?
Yeah.
The protagonist, right, Dr. Nash? He could see things that other people couldn't see, right? This is like what the prophet would do. He sees the things through the pattern of God, right? Through people, through the love of God, and then speaks out of that experience, right? So with that said, let's, actually, before we go back to Elijah, I want to direct you to this image, okay? This is the crucifixion. This is one of the panels of the Eisenheim Altarpiece in France, right? A very graphic depiction of Jesus, by the way. You can see the scars, the hands gnarled, right? The feet gnarled. This isn't intended to be brush over what really happens. I want you to look at that image, and look at Jesus, and in your mind, think, what word would you use to describe this, to describe Jesus? Okay? Just think about that and hold that in your mind, and then we're going to come back to this later. Okay? So that said, let's get back to Elijah, okay? And the spiritually instructive scene of the Old Testament. Okay? If you're taking notes, by the way, you can find this in 1 Kings 18. It's great if you can go back tonight or whenever you go read these. But Elijah is sent by Yahweh to confront King Ahab. Right? In fact, in 1 Kings 17, it's written, "Ahab did evil in the sight of the Lord, more than all that were before him." And if you know about the kings of Israel, and all the evil they did, that's a pretty big statement, right? And what is it that made Ahab do all these evil things? And the reason was that Ahab went over to worship the gods of his wife, Jezebel. Something to remember. Invariably, sin comes from bad worship. Keep that in mind as we go through this. So Elijah confronts Ahab and says to Ahab that he's troubled Israel by forsaking the commandments of the Lord and following the Baals, right? It's a great scene in the Old Testament. Elijah, through Ahab, challenges there are 450 priests of Baal that he challenges to a duel, if you will, showdown at Mount Carmel. Right? kind of like the modern day UFC. You can see it now, Pharisees selling inside seats. There you go. Ironically, the fact that there are 450 priests of Baal and only Elijah, it's fairly indicative, I think, of the ratios in the world today. The avatars of bad worship are ubiquitous, they're everywhere. Right? So Elijah, inspired by his confidence in God, challenges them. The slide we have of Elijah. So they're going to erect their altars, right, to their God, and will call on him. And Elijah will erect his altar and call on his God. Right? And the priests of Baal go first. They erect their altars. Right? They call on their gods. It says all morning, they hop around the altar, they beg and they cajole, and call on their gods. Right? There's no answer. And there's a great, great mockery by Elijah. He reads this. It says, at noon, Elijah mocked them, saying, cry aloud. Surely he's a god. Either he's meditating, or he's wandered away, or he's on a journey. Maybe he's asleep and has to be wakened. The implication in Hebrew is, maybe he's taking a nap. Some say, the Hebrew even suggests, maybe he's in the bathroom. Who knows, right? He's not answering. He's not here. Then it gets even more interesting. He says, so they cried aloud, it was their custom, and they cut themselves with swords and lances. And the blood gushed out of them, right? The idea was they're adding to the sacrifice, right? With their own blood, they're cutting themselves to do this, right? As midday passed, they raved until the time of the offering the oblation, but there was no voice, no answer, no response. Then Elijah builds his altar, right? Puts the sacrifice on it, drenches it with water, right? Calls on his God. What happens? Fire comes down, consumes the offering, consumes the altar, the water, everything, right? And it's natural, right, that we want to focus on this challenge, right, and the ensuing battle. But there's a lot more here we're going to look at right now. A lot more. It's a very telling spiritual story that reveals the results of what we worship. What did we say earlier? Invariably, sin comes from what? From bad worship. So as Bishop Barron suggests, think of the altars erected by the Baals. Think of them as symbolic of all the errant paths that the human spirit takes. Think of them that way. St. Augustine said this, Lord, you've made us for yourself. Therefore, our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. Let me repeat that. Lord, you've made us for yourself. Therefore, our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. We've been wired for God. We've been made for right worship. Only an infinite God can fulfill the infinite longing of our hearts. Bishop Barron goes on to correlate these altars to the Baals with what St. Thomas Aquinas referred to as the four great substitutes for God. The four errant paths that we tend to take and substitute for God. Right? This longing to be united with God and create substitutes. The four great substitutes for God, we categorize them. And it could be one or a combination of these in general. Right? Wealth, pleasure, power, and honor. Right? In our quest to find happiness, these are what we worship and substitute for God. So imagine the priests of Baal as avatars for these things. Right? Think on the ground, as Bishop Barron says, right? In our culture, as in any culture, everywhere. prophets of wealth, they're everywhere. I worship. This is one of the altars I worship. Right? Wealth, right? You want to be happy? You just become as wealthy as you can. You'll be happy, right? People spend their whole lives trying to achieve this. However, even if they accrue wealth, people still are unsatisfied. Then what? I must need more, right? I don't have enough. I need more. Do you know anything like this? I need more and I'm happy. So what do? They hop around the altar, beg, cajole, worship this false god. And yet, it's still not enough. And then they panic. Do it more, right? I need more. To the point where they harm themselves, right? Remember the priests of Baal? Cutting themselves, right? Harming themselves? This is what we do. This is what happens to addicts, right? Sin is always an addiction. You'll always need more because it will never fully fulfill the longing of the infinite soul. Yeah, you'll get a rush. Biochemically, you'll get a rush. Your body will release chemicals that feel good, but that'll wear off. And then you need it again. Right? So it's addiction. Right? Pleasure, the prophets of pleasure, everywhere, right? Just be happy. Find pleasure and be happy. Right? Same cycle, right? You get a buzz right, from it, the buzz wears off. You need more, right? Get another buzz, the buzz wears off. Again, seek more and more to the point where you begin to harm yourself, right? Anyone who's ever been addicted to food, to sex, to pornography, to alcohol, to work, they understand this. They understand this well, right? It's never going to fully fulfill you. You always need more. Power, just another poison, right? Same cycle, different poison, right? Okay, we hop around, we try to fulfill ourselves, right? I just have the power, right? Politicians, right? Relate to that right here. Politicians. It works for them. Works for not all, but most of them. Right? I have power, be happy. I'll give them my place in life. Right? Fulfill us? No, we can't. We're not wired for that. It's not what we're wired for. Remember you read this in the 9th chapter of Luke, it's an interesting passage where James and John, the disciples, right? Jesus nicknamed them sons of thunder. Right? And they say to Jesus, they come to Jesus because the Samaritans aren't listening to Jesus. He says to Jesus, do you want us to call down fire from heaven to consume them? Right? The way Elijah did, ironically he referenced Elijah, right? We just looked at. Do you want us to do that? Bring down fire on these guys, right? You just like power, right? You want to be in control, right? Ironically, right, the Samaritans were their neighbors, right? They read them, they're supposed to be their neighbors. Which brings up another interesting quote from Chesterton, by the way. It says, the Bible tells us to love our neighbors and also to love our enemies. Probably because generally they're same people. We want power, right? But what was Jesus' response to James and John? He says, you know not what spirit you are of. Right? That's not the Spirit of God. Right? Even if you had the power to do that, which we'll look at in a moment, that's not how God operates. Right? This is not how the kingdom of God is to come. Right? Honor, maybe that's your poison, right? It seems, often feels like we're underappreciated, insignificantly honored, right? And there's nothing wrong with honor in itself. Aquinas said, honor is a flag of virtue. Right? But notice, honor is not intended for you. It's intended for others. It's to hold you up and say, this is worth imitating, right? It's not to edify or aggrandize you. It's for other people so that they could see it as something worth following, right? If we get addicted to it, though, and we need that, right? Then we hop around that altar constantly, right? We need to feel recognized, right? What's the use of doing it if I don't feel recognized, right? This is the problem with the Pharisees, right? Jesus says, when you pray, right, you go into the street corner so everybody can see you. Why pray if no one's going to see you? Right? Right? It's not about us. It's not to honor us. Right? And if we're addicted to it, we're worshiping a false god. So there are a number of things we try to substitute for God, right? And if that can't fully fill us, where do we find happiness? How can we find happiness? Right? Let's look at, to explore this, let's look at the best summation of what Jesus taught. You can read this on your own, the 5th, 6th, and 7th chapters of Matthew, right? The great Sermon on the Mount. Right? Often part of that, those 3 chapters, is referred to as the Beatitudes, right? And they sum up, if you will, Jesus' great prophetic message. The Beatitudes. Again, following the lead of Bishop Barron again, let's look at the Beatitudes, though, in a way that might be a little bit different. Okay? There are 8 Beatitudes, right? And 4 of them, though, are sometimes thought of as kind of counterintuitive and almost negative, if you will. Okay? So we're going to look at those with the purpose of helping us understand how to get out of these addictive patterns, right? These are the addictive patterns that are going to harm us, right? There are Beatitudes that are going to help us get out of these patterns. Right? We're going to look at it under this roof, right? So as we do this too, keep in mind, again, the priests of Baal, right? Avatars of the world, wealth, pleasure, power, and honor. So let's see wealth and shrewdness. That was mine. You believe that's the path to happiness? That's the altar you hop around and beg and plead? What does Jesus say? He says, blessed are the poor in spirit. Ironically, in Luke, it actually says literally, blessed are the poor. Interestingly, the Greek word for blessed is makarios. It's a beautiful word. It means blessed or happy. However, some suggest a good translation of this word, makarios, is lucky. How fortunate you are to be poor in spirit. Does that mean money's bad in itself? No. In fact, we're to be stewards. Right? Great things can be done if we handle money well and do great things in the kingdom of God with it. Nothing wrong with that. But there's plenty wrong if we make money into our God. Right? How lucky you are. Makarios. How happy you are. How fortunate you are. Detached from wealth to be poor in spirit. How happy you are to be detached from material things. The attitude is this: Lord, if I have more wealth or less wealth, it doesn't matter. As long as I'm doing your will. This is the attitude. The attitude of detachment from wealth is something the Greek authors call this apatheia. It's not apathy in a negative way. Right? It just means that you're detached from it. Right? Ignatius of Loyola, the great founder of the Jesuits, he called this indifferencia, indifference. Right? Here's a passage to go home and read tonight. the latter part of the 6th chapter of Matthew. How lucky you are, how fortunate you are, if money is not your God. Right? Read that into that rubric. What if pleasures are poison? What if pleasures are poison? What does Jesus say? Blessed are those who mourn. That sounds strange. Right? Blessed are those that mourn. You mean I should be happy if I'm mourning? Again, though, we have to understand it under this rubric, right? What is Jesus really saying? Right? How lucky you are, how fortunate you are, if you're not attached to good feelings. Right? There's nothing wrong with pleasures, certain pleasures, right? What did Jesus do at the Feast of Cana? Anybody? What did Jesus do at the Feast of Cana?
Water and wine.
Or water and wine, right? If it wasn't, we want pleasure, right? Like turn the water to wine, right? Wine's pleasurable, right? By the way, that's an interesting passage. It's another one to go home and read when you get a chance, right? It's interesting. Who asked Jesus to turn the water into wine? Mary. What does Jesus call her in response?
Woman.
Woman. And at first blush, it almost seems disrespectful, doesn't it? Woman? Calling the woman woman? But we need to understand the spiritual. Right? Wine in the scriptures is symbolic of the exuberance and intoxication of divine life. Mary's speaking for all of Israel, in fact, all of creation, when she's saying they've run out of the exuberance and the joyfulness that comes out of the union with God. So when Jesus responds to her, woman, right, that's the term that was given to Eve, right? The mother of creation. Right? Go back and read that through the spiritual eyes. It's really fascinating. Right? So nothing wrong with pleasure. However, there's plenty wrong with making pleasure into a God. Right? How lucky you are, how fortunate you are, if you're not attached to pleasure. Let me tell you something. Sometimes doing the will of God will be anything but pleasurable. Think about that. Power? What if that's the old you hop around, right? What does Jesus say? Blessed are the meek. Yeah, it seems strange, doesn't it? It seems counterintuitive. Blessed are the meek. But again, let's look at it through spiritual eyes. You can say, Lord, whether I have more power or less power, doesn't matter, right? As long as I'm following your will, that's what matters. How lucky you are, how fortunate you are if you're not attached to that. Interesting scene. By the way, I moved on a little bit too fast. I apologize. I wanted to share, we were talking about the poor in spirit. I have a video, by the way, a couple minute video, a 5-minute video. This idea of being detached from wealth. This is a fascinating, it was filmed as a social experiment, but it's something I want you guys to see. This is an example of what we're talking about. Okay? So we talked about detachment from wealth, detachment from pleasure. We'll get into power in a moment. Let's just take a moment to look at this mic. There's a couple of ads on here.
Yo, what's going on, you guys? So today, I met a homeless man, and what he did was extremely breathtaking. Before this video starts, make sure to turn on the notifications for this channel so you guys will be updated every single time I upload a new video. Let's see what happens. like over here like stressing the heck out, like I don't know what to do anymore, dude, like completely lost, I have no money on me right now, she's really sick, she really needs the medicine, that's the thing, it's like seriously sucks living paycheck to paycheck when you don't have enough money for your daughter's medicine, and you can't really do anything, you know what I mean? It's like I'm so lost right now, dude. Just let me know if you can, help out any money, dude, because I really need to get my daughter medicine, dude, but yeah, I'll hit you up later, man, alright. Alright, peace, man, peace. Yeah, I need to get my daughter medicine. It's like, I don't know what to do, man. Like, I don't have money. Huh? Yeah, I know, it sucks so badly. You know, it's like, she depends on me, to get the medicine too. It's like, I don't know what to do, I can't get her medicine, It's so bad. Huh? Yeah, I'm over here all the time. Yeah, Okay. Hey, sir, what's up? Huh? I'm feeling good, man. I'm still trying to figure it out, and I have your back, right? I'm still trying to figure it out and everything, you know what I mean? What happened to your bags?
I'm thinking back to what I got this morning from there. A few things that,
Oh, did you get something from Target?
yeah.
What happened?
I get pillows,
Like,
yeah.
okay.
I don't think you bought doctors now, but you seem to be a little more helpful-minded, so, yeah.
So you return,
It was a security guard.
you return your pillows or sleeping bags because you need my daughter my medicine?
Yeah.
Why would you do that though? You didn't have to do
I
that.
think pretty stressed out, and all I can remember, anytime.
Don't you need that stuff though?
I think about it, I've been okay.
But don't you need this money? You need something to eat.
I get some grab, people come up.
And how long has it been since you read though?
Yesterday, and,
You haven't ate since yesterday and you're trying to give me money?
yeah.
That really means a lot to me, like something, like you would do that, you know what I mean? Like, you seem like you really need the money too, Where do you sleep at night?
Here and there, anywhere, quite good feet.
So like, that's incredibly inspiring, like, how you would do that. Here's another $500, man.
Your kids read.
No, man, give me a hug, man.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So far, yeah.
That, like, what you did, that really, no, don't cry, please don't cry. What you did, that was really inspiring, man. No, don't cry, please don't cry. Just give me a smile, that's it. I just want you to smile, man, like, what you did, that was really inspiring, man, like, that's incredibly crazy. So, go back to Target, get the sleeping bag, get all the stuff that you had, and then get more stuff, and get a room to sleep and stuff like that, man. No, man. I mean, what you did was, no, yeah, I'm 100% sure, and have a seat, man, have a seat. I make videos on the internet actually, and I really did.
That's awesome.
Think about that, right? Here's a man living on the streets, sleeping on a bench, right? Finds the money. What does he do with the money? He buys a sleeping bag and a pillow, right? And then finds out that there's a need for the medicine. That's the only thing he owns, right? And his backpack is all of his possessions, right? And he leaves it with the guy to go bring back his pillow and sleeping bag to give the money to the man who needs it for his daughter. I mean, how many of us would even do that if we heard somebody sitting next to us with all that we have, right? This is indiferencia, right? This is Macarios. How fortunate this man is not to be attached to wealth, right? That he can see the needs of other people, right? That he'd be willing to go back and return it, right?
That Greek word, how do you spell it?
I'm sorry,
How do you spell that word? The
which one? Indiferencia or
one that means lucky.
or Macarios? M-A-R K-A-R-I-O-S. Macarios. So again, this is what Jesus is talking about. Again, not that we have to, not everybody, I'm not saying we need to go and sell everything we have and go live as monks. That's not the point, right? The point is whatever we have, not to attach to, not to make it our God, right? This man is happy in the mind, in the pattern of God, right? We talked a bit about pleasure, power. We were talking about power, right? Again, how blessed are the meek. Again, seems just so strange. The meek are blessed. Right? So, it's an example of this. Let's in the Garden of Gethsemane, right? When Jesus is arrested, he's taken by the soldiers. Right? There's an interesting passage. It's in Matthew. It's in the 26th chapter, and it reads this, where Jesus says, "Or do you think that I cannot now pray to my Father, and He will provide me with more than 12 legions of angels?" The word legions is an interesting word. In Greek, the word is stratia. We get the English word strategy from it, right? Another good rendering of that word might be armies, right? Remember in Scripture, when people saw one angel, they were terrified. Jesus says, don't you know that even now, if I wanted to, I could call upon my Father, and He would give me 12 legions of angels? Right? He had the power to do that. Right? But what did He do? He submitted everything to doing the will of His Father. Right? How blessed you are, how happy you are, not to be attached to power. Right? Honor, what if that's the altar we offer now? Honor. Right? What does Jesus say? You want to know that beatitude? It sounds so strange. How blessed you are, how lucky you are, if people hate you and prescribe your name as cursed because of the Son of Man. I'm lucky? I'm lucky if people call me cursed, right? Again, we need to look at this through the pattern of the divine mind and translate it spiritually. Right? How lucky you are if you're not addicted to, if you're not attached to the approval of other people. Right? If you don't need that, how fortunate you are. Right? Believe me, again, there are times in doing the will of God, you'll be anything but honored. Right? You can be ridiculed, you can be persecuted. Right? You see it around the world. How lucky you are if you're not attached to honor. Right? So think of these Beatitudes as a kind of cleansing exercise. Right? Get rid of the false gods that worship. Right? Then you'll be ready for the real thing. Cleanse yourself. Right? Detach yourself from the false gods, from the bad worship. And then you can become reconciled to God. Reconcile, a beautiful word, right? Re, again, con, with, cilia, sit. To sit with again. Right? To come back into communion with God. You'll align yourself with God in the stance of what's called adoratio. Adoration. Ad ora. Ad to ora, mouth. To be mouth to mouth with God. The way the Father and the Son are, to breathe love back and forth, mouth to mouth, through the Holy Spirit. Right? This is where we can move to, right? Once we detach ourselves from the false gods. Right? What will you become? Hunger and thirst for righteousness. Right? The other Beatitudes. You'll be merciful. You'll purify your heart. You become a peacemaker. The positive, quote-unquote, positive Beatitudes. Right? So what's the best example we can find to exemplify what we're talking about? Let's go back to St. Thomas Aquinas again. Aquinas says, If you want to see the full exemplification of Beatitudes, look at Christ crucified. He says, love what Jesus loved on the cross and despise what he despised on the cross, and you'll be happy. What did Jesus despise or eschew on the cross? Talk about these things. Well, look at Christ crucified. He's stripped of everything, right? He has nothing. Pleasure. Again, let's look at Christ crucified. He's pushed to the limit of physical, psychological, even spiritual suffering. Right? Power. Christ crucified. Utterly powerless. Right? Nailed to the cross. Can't even move. Right? And this is despite what we talked about before, what he had the power to do. Right? And detached himself from it. Right? Honor. He's completely humiliated, right? He's put on the outskirts of the city. Everybody walking in and out of the city see this naked man humiliated on the cross, right? He's detached from honor, right? How lucky you are, how fortunate you are not to be addicted to wealth, pleasure, power, or honor. Right? How lucky you are if you freed yourself from the false gods of the world. What did Jesus love on the cross? He loved doing the will of his Father. He was clean of heart. What did he hunger and thirst for? Just one thing, right? Righteousness. He was merciful. The word in Hebrew is hesed. It's a beautiful word. Tender mercies of God. He exemplified it fully, right? On the cross, after all the excruciation he went through, the pain, the agony, what does he do? He looks out, and what does he tell his Father? Father, please forgive them. They don't know what they do. That's the mercy of God. And what did he become thereby? The ultimate peacemaker. Christ crucified is the exemplification, personification of the Beatitudes. Love what he loved on the cross. Shun what he shunned on the cross. And you'll be happy. So let's look at this image again. You guys and I all. When you look at this, how will you see the eyes of God, the power of God? Somebody, what's the one word that comes to mind when you look at this thing? Free?
Love.
Agony.
Agony? What I want you to think about, I want you to pray about in the Holy Spirit, right? This is what challenged me, changed my life entirely. To look at this and see the image of happiness. Pray about this. Ask the Holy Spirit. Yeah. This is the image of happiness. What is this here? What is he doing? He's detached himself from all the false gods of the world. He's not attached to any of them. Wealth, power, pleasure, honor. What does he love here? What is he doing? What is he? He loves doing the will of his Father. He gives everything to do the will of his Father. To become intimate, right? To fulfill what he's called to fulfill. This is happiness. It challenged everything, all my preconceptions, everything that I could ever think of. When I first heard this message, I went home and I thought about everything in my life that I was trying to hold on to, that I thought would bring me happiness. Okay? And it was like I was on a platform and it got completely pulled out from under me. I didn't know where to stand. I didn't know where do I go. Right? It challenged everything. But I had to meditate on this. I had to think about this. I had to look to implement this in my life. And I'm telling you, true. Jesus is the exemplification of what he preached. This is it. He lived it out in the crucifixion. Thankfully, not all of us are going to have to do this, right? But this is the attitude. This is the place that we want to get to. This is the place where we'll find true peace that nobody can take from you, right? Wealth, it could all be gone tomorrow. Have you ever seen the movie Too Big to Fail? It's not a documentary. It's actually, there's actors in it, but it's based on a true story, right? And there's a scene in there where William Hurt plays Hank Paulson. And there's a scene, it's a fascinating scene. They're at a banquet, and he walks outside, and he's looking at the stars, and he's just like in another play, right? And his wife comes out and goes, honey, what's the matter? What's wrong? And he says, this whole thing could be over. She goes, oh, it'll be okay. Come on inside, it'll be okay. He goes, no, you don't understand. He was talking about the financial system. It was pushed to an edge where, and if you understand the way financial systems work based on derivatives and extension of money, the whole thing could end. It truly can. It's a reality that could happen. What happens if it does? Would you be any less happy? If we're detached from it, my happiness is no longer predicated on it, right? Do I get the raise? Do I get the promotion? Doesn't really matter. That's not going to be what brings me true happiness and peace, right? When I walk this, when I live this, when I detach myself from those things and attach myself to the things that Jesus loved, I will have a happiness that no one can ever take from me. No one. One last thought before we go to questions. Moses in the Old Testament, he commanded the people of Israel to teach their children. It's one of the things he said. He said, if we don't teach our children, it only takes one generation and the story is lost, right? It only takes one generation. Remember, the false gods in the world are everywhere. What are they telling our children? Here's how you become happy, right? Wealth, power, pleasure, honor. Right? That's the message they're being given, right? We have to be the modern day Elijahs. We have to challenge the priests of Baal and challenge the prophets of the false gods. We have to teach our children the paradox of what John Paul II called the law of the gift. Anyone know what the law of the gift is? Anybody? The law of the gift says, your being will increase in the measure that you give it away. Your being will increase in the measure that you give it away. JP2 stated, man finds himself by making himself a sincere gift to others. Right? The world tells him, fill up your ego, right? With all the substitutes for God and it'll make you happy, right? Actually, it won't. It can't. That's the lesson of the prodigal son, right? What does he say to his father, right? Give me my share, right? Give me what belongs to me so I can be happy, right? In essence, was saying to his father, it's like you're dead, right? I get the inheritance when the parent dies, right? What's more important to me is what's coming to me, right? Give me what's mine, right? So I can be happy. Right? And what does he do with it? He squanders it, right? Riotous and without he squanders it. Of course he does, right? It's only when he hooks himself back into the love of the Father, right, that he finds life, and he finds it to the full, right? Our task is to live out and hold up this image, this strange image of Christ crucified, this unnerving image and say with prophetic clarity to the world, that is the vision of happiness. Thank you. We're going to open up for questions, and if anyone disagrees, I'm leaving the mic on this one. Questions? Thoughts? Slide you on?
I just want to commend you for your delivery and the depth and the breadth of the things. I know you well enough to come here and not expect me, fun and joyful. That was deep.
Well, it's the Spirit of God that, like I said, this is something I've had to really, it's an unnerving image for me. Right? Again, it went against every grain of sensibility that I was raised in. Right? Just so you know, like most of my adult life, I grew up Catholic, by the way. I spent most of my adult life in Protestant churches. When I was 18, I was indoctrinated into the messages of the prosperity doctrine and the faith doctrine, right? And that's, and I mean this please understand the way that I mean this. It's a heresy, right? And I don't mean that in a way like those people should be burned at the stake. That's not what I'm talking about. Heresy comes from the word choice, right? It's a choice that we choose our own way, right? And again, what we did with these doctrines, right? We took this message that Jesus gave us and we said, you know what, that's not what I want, right? So let me contort it, right? Let me twist it to put it into a way that is amenable to me, right? And what is that? I can tell God what I want, and God will give it to me if I have enough faith. Right? I can ask for prosperity. Right? I can have all that I want if I believe enough. Right? What does Jesus say? Blessed are those who are detached from wealth. Right? What was the sin in the garden? It was misplaced self-trust, right? Didn't trust God. Wanted to be God themselves. That's what these doctrines do. It makes us want to be the God. Right? I'm in control, right? This was tremendously unnerving to me. But I'm telling you, I've never had the happiness. Again, there are times when I've been happy, but complete happiness. Right? Never had it until now. And again, no one can take it. The world financial systems crumble. It crumbles. Right? So you have a question?
Yeah, but what's the difference between the prosperity gospel and the law of the gift? Because they have a superficial similarity. Give away, and you will get.
Give away, and you will find yourself. Right? But you're not giving away in order to give. Right? By giving away, you're finding pattern of God and move into intimacy with God. I don't give to get. That was the message. That was exactly the message of the prosperity message, right? When you give, you get back 30, 60, 100-fold, right? Why give if you're not getting back, right? Why in James, right? James 1:27 reads, pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this, right? To visit the widow and orphan in their need, and keep oneself unspotted from the world. Right? Why the widow and orphan? Why the widow and orphan?
Can't get back.
Because they can't get back. In that society, the widow couldn't work, right? If the husband died, they couldn't provide for themselves, nor could the orphan, right? So if I give to you to get back, I've already got my reward, right? That's what Jesus says, right? Give to those who can't give back to you. Then you understand the way God is, right? Love those who persecute you and despise you. For God causes the sun to shine on the wicked and the good. He gives rain to the just and the unjust. Right? We're not doing it to get back for ourselves. That's not God. Right? God is the free gift of giving. And by doing that is where we connect with Him. Right?
This reminds me of the 40 days in the desert, where the 3 temptations Satan gives him. It's like the pleasure of food and water, the power and honor of this civilization, and then the power to show that he's God and have the angels catch him. So
Absolutely.
it's like he's tempted with all for the greatest God substitutes, and he has them all.
Shows Him the kingdoms of the world, right? If you'll just bow down and worship me, I'll give you all of this. Right? And what was His response? Serve only one God. I'm here to do the will of my Father. Right? Detach yourself, right? And you will be happy.
One of the things about power, and I don't think of myself, but even myself as control sometimes. Like, I worry a lot. Like, I want to, like you were saying, praying for things so that they'll happen in my life. So I feel more in control. We always talk about the 9 mountains for. And so I think that that's one of the things that more people when we think of. We don't think that we're craving power, but we're craving control over our lives, and it's the power of our own selves when we do that.
This is interesting, right? Because in the Garden of Eden, right, when God gives them commandment, right, not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? What does the adversary of God say to them?
I'm sorry.
What is the snake, right? The adversary of God. What does it say? What did they say? What does the snake say to them?
That God's lying to them, and that you will see that you will understand, have greater understanding and power.
Right. God's holding out from you, right? Right? If you eat from the tree of knowledge, you'll become like God. He's holding out, right? You can't trust God, right? Disordered self-trust, right? Edify yourself. That's what the enemy of God would want us to do. Right? If we become God, we don't need God. Right? We think we could become, it's ridiculous even the thought to begin with. Right? This quest to find God. People are, let's go out into space and see if we can find God somewhere. Right? God is, what does Aquinas say? Si comprende, non es Dios. Right? If you could understand, it's not God. Right?
Can you touch on the relationship between Christ and the Father?
I'm sorry.
Can you touch on the relationship between the Son of God and God?
Mm-hmm.
Can you take a moment to describe that, what that may have been like?
In terms of his
The relationship
location?
between the two.
Yeah. So, and this, I think if we look at like the Trinity, right? The Father, the relationship between the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. I think it was Augustine, right, who actually gave an interesting idea, right? Again, when we think we understand God, the moment we think we fully understand God, we miss it, because we don't, right? First of all, God is beyond what we can think, right? But we can try to grasp it, and Augustine actually talked about an example, since man was created in the image of God, right? He used man as kind of a semblance of helping us to try to understand to some extent the Trinity, right? And he said there's the Father, right, is the mens, called it, the mind. It's not a good translation, it's much more than that, kind of the primal force behind everything, right? And then he called the Son, the awareness, the self-awareness. Like when I talk about myself, right? If I'm talking about me, right? I'm not a different person. I'm one person, right? But I'm talking about myself, right? So I have awareness of who I am. But I'm not two different people, right? That make sense, the concept? So he says the Son is the self-awareness. He calls it notizia sui, self-awareness, right? And the Spirit, the same way when I can love myself, when I get to a place where I love myself, right? Self-love, that's the Spirit, right? Amor sui, self-love. And he says the idea would be the Father and the Son, the concept that I mentioned earlier, right? Is adoratio, that breathe mouth to mouth. Is the Father and Son breathing mouth to mouth the love back and forth through the Holy Spirit. Right? It's kind of an image to give us so we can start to maybe try to grasp it to some extent, although it's beyond what we can comprehend. Right? And this is the way, this is the stance that we want to be with God. Right? Mouth to mouth in love, in intimacy, breathing back and forth love with one another. Right? So the concept of God is obviously beyond what we can comprehend. But what does he say throughout his life? I don't do anything unless I hear my Father tell me to do it. Right? I'm here to fulfill the will of the Father. Right? And gives up everything to do it. Right? And this is how we can, in that he finds happiness. Right? This is the same way we can. Do you have a question? I bought a lamp at an auction one time. I did that.
It reminds me of the quotation, happiness is like a butterfly. Once you chase it, it eludes you. But once you change your mind, God, it comes and sits softly on your shoulder.
Interesting. It's interesting.
The main point there is God.
And it's interesting, you know, we talk about, obviously being Catholic, right? This concept of suffering. Right? We suffer at times. Life isn't without its suffering. But it's interesting, and I was talking with Jamie about this the other night. You mentioned the butterfly, right? I don't know if you know this, but the caterpillar, right? When it metamorphosizes into a butterfly, as it breaks out of the cocoon, if it doesn't do the work to break out, right? If you break the cocoon for it, it will never release the chemicals it needs to be able to fly. Right? It's through that process of breaking out of the cocoon and the struggle, it releases the chemicals that enable it to become what it is to its fullness. It's an interesting analogy. Right? When we go through life on earth, the things that we go through, we do believe in an eternal, right? Something beyond this world. We can, if we hold to that, we can find meaning in our suffering. Right? I'm not saying we go out, we don't flagellate ourselves and all that kind of stuff, right? It's not what we're talking about. But if there is, you know, if we submit everything to the will of the Father, we can trust him in everything, even in death. These are challenging concepts, right? Again, I want to re-emphasize, and that's why we're filming it. Go back to these ideas, right? It's not something you just go, oh, that's easy, I get it, and you got it, right? It took me a long time to think about these things, to pray about these things, right? Go back, search what Jesus is saying. Go back and read the Sermon on the Mount. Read what he's talking about. But understand it in this rubric, right? Through the pattern, through the divine mind. I think you'll find it true. Any questions? Well, if you want to close in prayer and get out a few minutes early.
Let's have a couple of announcements.
In a couple of minutes. By the way, I loved it when we said, okay, at St. John's, if you've never been here before, the bathrooms are here. I love that. That was like, you're talking to me, you moved me right up to that.